Joyce, President Biden ran on reforming the Justice Department, as his own chief of staff points out. Take a listen.
One reason why Joe Biden got elected was he promised that we take the decision over who got prosecuted and what away from the White House and put it in the Justice Department. Only Richard Nixon and Donald Trump in the modern era believed that prosecution decisions should be made in the Oval Office, not at the Justice Department. We've returned the practice that every other president, Democratic and Republican, has had since Watergate.
Joyce, your thoughts on the tension between a desire and need for accountability and a concern on the part of the White House about this all being understood as political?
So I think Ron Klain, the chief of staff, gets it exactly right. You know, none of this is easy. There's not a perfect fix. We're in completely uncharted waters with a former president who clearly committed all sorts of misconduct, probably crimes, while he was in office. But when I teach democratic institutions to my law students, I try to ask them to think about a game that you play with multiple hands, a game like bridge or hearts, where you're not just playing one game, but you're really playing a series of little games. And if you're so intent on winning one hand of hearts or spades or bridge that you're willing to violate all of the rules and blow up the game, well, there's no game left to play at the end of that. And that's where we are right now. Yes, people want to see the former president held accountable, but we have to do it in a way that's consistent with our rules, with our rule of law, or we really run the risk of damaging this democracy, which was so severely strained by the former president, beyond repair. We have to let, although it seems slow and ponderous, Merrick Garland use the rule of law to hold the former president accountable.
Joyce, that comparison makes me realize I need to brush up on my understanding of cards as much as my understanding of the law. Betsy, Garland has been criticized for his delay in charging Meadows specifically with contempt of Congress. What kind of timeline can we expect if the House votes to refer Peter Navarro, Dan Scavino to the DOJ?
Probably a similar timeline. In general, based on my conversations with people who have deep experience with the way the process works when it comes to this very specific type of congressional referral, it would often take the Justice Department at least 6 months to process whether or not they wanted to charge someone for breaking the law by either lying to Congress or defying a congressional subpoena. DOJ just moves slowly. The Bannon case is almost certainly the exception that proves the rule. We should not expect lickety-slip prosecutorial style decisions in future criminal referrals. One thing I would just add, though, on the Garland topic that's so important here is that there's been a development just in the last few days, news that has emerged that I think is some of the most important news on the January 6th story in weeks, if not longer. And that is that a federal grand jury has expanded its investigation to look into not just the people who punched police officers and broke windows at the Capitol building, but also to look at the people who helped organize the rally on the Ellipse prior to the attack on the Capitol building, and at the people who participated in the president's alternate elector scheme. We don't know which exact people they've called in as witnesses to the grand jury, but this is just a really, really big development, because what it shows us is that Justice Department prosecutors, the DOJ prosecutors looking at January 6th, the topics that they're looking at, the issue areas that they're looking at, have a lot more overlap with what the Select Committee is looking at than we knew about a week ago. There's more going on at the Justice Department than we're aware of. We learned that just in the last several days. And while, of course, many people, according to the Times reporting, the president himself, are frustrated with the pace, at DOJ, as Joyce knows very well, there's often lots of stuff going on under the surface, and people can be surprised on a short timeline.
So, Betsy, as always, I'm going to remind our audience, though they do not need the reminder, two separate tracks here. We've talked about DOJ. Let's talk about the 1-6 committee, because you have Jamie Raskin saying they still don't know exactly what happened during those missing hours in Trump's call log. Take a listen.
Some things we've been able to piece together from other people's interviews and depositions that we know took place during that time. We are aware of other phone calls that took place during that time that included the president, but we have no comprehensive, fine-grained portrait of what was going on during that period, and that's obviously of intense interest to us.
All right, so just talk us through that, Betsy. Why haven't they been able to fill in that gap as comprehensively as Raskin might want?
Part of the problem is that many of the people who were in the room with Trump during that 7-hour window thus far, Mark Meadows most notably, have not answered questions in person yet from the January 6th Select Committee. One other person who has that granular level knowledge that the committee wants so badly is Ivanka Trump. Her husband, of course, Jared Kushner, did speak to the committee voluntarily last week. That's also a huge change. We don't know what that might signal about Ivanka's openness to cooperation, but it's sure not a bad sign. Part of the challenge for the committee as well is that they don't necessarily know what telephones Trump was talking on when he had conversations in that 7-hour window that weren't logged on the official log. There's been some reporting about some particular phone calls, but there's no way of saying, oh, we know he was on this number, that number, and the other number, so we can just subpoena the phone records associated with those numbers. It's really complicated. They're getting perilously close to herding cat territory. They're getting perilously close to the place where documents are of limited use, and where they're at right now is really needing witnesses who were in the room with the president, listening to the phone calls to cooperate. That's the only really definitive way to figure this out, and they're not there yet.